Rejection is an almost universal experience. Everyone, at some point in life, has felt the pain of being ignored, excluded, or left behind, whether by a romantic partner, a friend, a social group, or even family members. At first glance, this type of pain seems disproportionate. After all, why can an unanswered word, an ignored message, or a declined invitation hit us so deeply, so viscerally, as if a part of us is being torn away? Conventional psychology often tries to answer this with explanations about self-esteem or insecurity. But Carl Gustav Jung went further. According to Jung, the pain of rejection is not only linked to the present event, it touches on something much older, deeper, and more archetypal. When someone is rejected, the human psyche does not just react to the current moment. It unconsciously relives all past experiences where exclusion meant danger, abandonment, or emotional death. What we are really feeling is the reactivation of a primordial wound, the fear of being left alone, helpless, invisible, a fear that forms in childhood when the acceptance of parents or caregivers was literally a matter of survival. And that is exactly why rejection hurts so much, because it dismantles us. It makes us feel as if we are not just being refused, but as if we are being annihilated. Jung called this phenomenon the abandonment complex, a set of memories, emotions, and automatic reactions deeply rooted in the unconscious. These psychic forces operate like invisible programs, triggering emotional responses that are beyond our rational control. It's as if we are taken back in an instant to the wounded child we once were. But there is something even more unsettling. Jung observed that the people who suffer the most from rejection are often those who have structured their entire identity around the acceptance of others. They wear what he called the dependent persona, a carefully crafted social mask designed to please, adapt, avoid conflict, and ensure love and approval. When this persona is rejected, the blow is not just emotional, it is existential. The feeling is that all of their existence has been invalidated, as there was never a true self behind that mask, only a constant performance. This introduction leads us to a central point. Rejection is not just an interpersonal problem. It is a mirror that reveals the unresolved parts of our inner world. It forces us to look at the shadow, the aspects we try to hide, that we deem unworthy of love, that we fear are the cause of rejection. And it is there that the potential for transformation resides. Because for Jung, all pain carries an invitation. Rejection, as cruel as it may seem, can be the trigger for a profound psychological liberation. As long as we are willing to traverse the pain and look at what it truly reveals. In this video, we will explore this journey in depth. We will understand why rejection activates the abandonment complex, how the dependent persona traps us, and why only by facing our shadow can we become truly free. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to true individuation, the process of becoming who we are, beyond the need to be accepted. Because in the end, what hurts us the most is not being rejected by others, it is having rejected ourselves. Carl Jung observed that the events that most destabilize us emotionally are not necessarily the most severe in objective terms, but rather those that activate deep, unconscious cores, emotional structures that we carry from our earliest years of life. Rejection is one of the main triggers for this. When someone excludes us, ignores us, or breaks a bond with us, we are not just dealing with a momentary frustration. We are touching, or rather, being engulfed by, a much older psychic content, what Jung called the abandonment complex. This complex is like an open wound that never healed. It is formed by early experiences of neglect, rejection, emotional punishment, or abandonment, even if subtle, that were absorbed by the child's psyche as existential threats. For the child, being rejected by their caregivers is interpreted not as a social problem, but as a risk of annihilation. They depend entirely on others for survival, and any sign of disapproval can be experienced as a danger of death. These experiences do not disappear over time. They hide, creating an underground emotional structure ready to be activated when adult life reproduces similar situations. Jung called this complex constellation, that is, an apparently trivial event, such as not being responded to by someone important, being fired, or being rejected by a partner, can trigger a devastating emotional chain reaction. The emotional response is disproportionate, not because we are fragile or immature, but because something deeper has been touched. Something we didn't even know still hurt. And the cruelest part is that, once activated, the complex takes control. It hijacks our rationality, distorts our perception, and makes us react impulsively, desperately, defensively, or even self-destructively. We can become excessively needy, aggressive, closed off, or emotionally unavailable. We are no longer dealing with the other. We are fighting against internal ghosts that have come to life. And the most tragic part, many people live their entire lives in this state, desperately trying to avoid new rejections without realizing they are trapped in an unconscious pattern. But the abandonment complex does not act alone. It is deeply intertwined with another structure of the psyche that Jung brilliantly analyzed, the dependent persona. This is the layer we put over our wounds to protect ourselves, a carefully constructed mask to ensure acceptance, approval, and belonging. And it is precisely about this that we will talk next. Because understanding the pain of rejection requires understanding the mask we wear to avoid it, and the price we pay for that. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. In an attempt to avoid the pain of rejection, human beings develop a sophisticated and often unconscious strategy, the creation of a dependent persona. For Jung, the persona is the social mask we use to interact with the world, a public identity shaped to meet others' expectations. It is not in itself something negative. It is necessary to live in society. But the problem begins when this persona becomes the only reference of identity, suffocating the true self and transforming the individual into a reflection of others' expectations. The dependent persona is, therefore, an exaggerated and distorted version of this social mask. It arises from the unconscious conviction that we will only be accepted and thus loved if we are exactly what the other desires. Since childhood, we learn to adjust our behavior to avoid punishment or rejection. The child who is praised for being obedient, for pleasing, for not making a scene, internalizes the belief that they need to be pleasant all the time, that their worth is conditioned on how much they can be accepted. Over the years, this strategy becomes so automatic that the person does not even realize they are living artificially. They become someone who pleases everyone, avoids conflict, molds themselves to the environment, and defines themselves based on external validation. This persona seeks compliments, approval, and belonging, not because it is vain, but because deep down it fears that if it stops being accepted, it will be forgotten, ignored, or discarded. The tragedy of this construction is that it does not protect from pain. It intensifies it. When this persona is rejected, the blow does not fall only on a part of the identity. It hits the whole. If you only know how to exist to please others, then any rejection transforms into a total denial of your existence. The pain comes not only from the loss of the other, but from the disintegration of an identity that was never truly yours. This type of individual does not know who they are outside of others' approval, and therefore they live in a constant state of emotional vigilance, interpreting every gesture, every silence, every expression as a possible threat to their worth. Rejection, in this context, is not just a traumatic event. It is an internal collapse. A collapse that brutally reveals the emptiness that exists behind the mask. But there is something even deeper. When the persona begins to crumble, and inevitably it will crumble, we are forced to confront what we have hidden for so long, our shadow. The aspects we deem unacceptable, shameful, or unworthy of love, and which we therefore bury in the unconscious. And this is precisely the next step of the journey. Because when rejection dismantles the persona, it compels us to face what has been behind it all along, the part of us that has never been shown, and that perhaps desperately needs to be heard. When the dependent persona begins to crumble, when rejection tears apart the social mask we wear to survive, something extremely uncomfortable happens. The shadow emerges. For Carl Jung, the shadow represents everything we reject in ourselves, our impulses, emotions, desires, and memories that have been deemed unacceptable by society, by family, and most importantly, by ourselves. It is composed of everything you have repressed to be accepted, and that is precisely why rejection has such brutal power. It forces us to confront exactly what we have spent our entire lives trying to hide. The human mind seeks explanations for pain. When we are rejected, the first reaction is not rational. It is emotional, primitive, and the automatic narrative that arises is almost always the same. There is something wrong with me. This thought, repeated like a silent mantra, is not the result of logic. It is the echo of the shadow. Because when we are rejected, we do not only access the pain of loss, we access the deep-seated belief that we are fundamentally flawed. This is where suffering intensifies. Rejection becomes evidence, a living proof that what we have always feared about ourselves was true all along. That we are not good enough, that we are unworthy of love, that deep down we deserve to be left aside. But these thoughts do not arise from the present reality. They come from the shadow. They come from unprocessed wounds, old traumas, buried feelings. And the most unsettling part, the more we deny this shadow, the stronger it becomes. The attempt to maintain a perfect image, to always be kind, pleasant, efficient, strong, requires a sacrifice, hiding all the parts of ourselves that do not fit this ideal. Yet the psyche does not allow itself to be deceived forever. What is repressed returns, and rejection is one of the most effective triggers for this. At this moment, reactions arise that often frighten us. Intense anger, toxic shame, a desire for revenge, deep self-loathing, emotional collapses. These are not exaggerations. They are manifestations of the shadow asking to be seen. Rejection acts like a broken mirror, reflecting distorted fragments of who we are, and forcing us to see what we have always tried to ignore. But here is the key. The shadow is not the enemy. It is, in fact, a collection of everything you needed to abandon in yourself, to be loved. Your repressed anger, your suffocated ambition, your unheard sadness, your genuine desires. All of this lives in the shadow. And when you are rejected, life is, in a way, offering you a brutal yet necessary opportunity to integrate these forgotten parts. Of course, this process is not simple. It is not enough to accept the shadow, as if signing a contract. You must dive into the pain, listen to the denied feelings, understand where they came from and why they were hidden. It is an emotional excavation work, an intimate confrontation with what scares us, but which, deep down, also liberates us. Because as Jung said, what you need most will be found where you least want to look. And that is why rejection, despite being painful, can be the portal to a psychic rebirth. But to cross this portal, something more than self-knowledge is needed. It is necessary to develop a new foundation of worth, a new internal center that no longer depends on external acceptance. In the next chapter, we will explore this new path. How rejection, when understood, can become the beginning of the true process of individuation. Because only when we stop begging for validation can we begin to build a real internal authority, one that no one can take away. Since the early years of life, we learn that being accepted is a currency of survival. The child quickly realizes that when they obey, smile, or behave properly, they receive love, attention, and protection. But when they displease, when they express anger, sadness, or their own desires, they are often ignored, punished, or shamed. Thus, they conclude that they will only be loved if they are what others expect. This mechanism marks the birth of a powerful illusion, the idea that our worth depends on external validation. Carl Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, compellingly describes how the modern individual has been gradually disconnected from their essence and conditioned to live as a function of the collective. It is not just the family or culture that demands conformity. It is the very structure of modern society, with its institutions, standards, and expectations, that transforms the individual into a statistical number, a consumer, a good citizen, a replaceable cog in an impersonal machine. In this context, social validation is not just a desire, it is almost an obligation. The problem is that this constant quest for acceptance is never satisfied. You can be praised 1,000 times. It only takes one criticism to collapse your self-esteem. You may be desired today and feel completely invisible tomorrow. External validation is volatile, inconsistent, based on factors that are beyond your control. And as long as your identity is grounded in it, you will always be vulnerable, always at the mercy of others' opinions, always afraid of being rejected. This cycle becomes an invisible prison. The individual shapes their behaviors, choices, and even their emotions to continue receiving approval. They become experts at predicting what others want to see. They learn to silence their most authentic impulses. And when, inevitably, they are rejected, no matter how hard they tried to please, the impact is devastating. Because it is not just a rejection of the action, it is a rejection of the very identity built with so much effort. This psychic prison keeps the individual trapped in the mask of the dependent persona. They do not live according to what they are. They live according to what they think they need to be to avoid abandonment. And this generates a silent exhaustion, a chronic sense of inadequacy, a fatigue from playing a role that never fully represents them. But Jung proposed an exit. He believed that true liberation can only begin when the individual develops what he called internal authority, a sense of worth and identity that comes from within, not from outside. A solid core that does not sway with the winds of others' opinions. This process, however, does not happen overnight. It requires a break from the addiction to approval. It requires courage to disappoint, to contradict, to say no. And most importantly, it requires a willingness to rediscover who you are when no one is watching. This is the beginning of the individuation process, the central concept in Jung's work and the key to true emotional freedom. In the next chapter, we will dive into this path of inner reconstruction. Because only when you stop seeking your worth in the eyes of others can you finally look at yourself with clarity and discover an identity that cannot be rejected, because it does not depend on anyone else to exist. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. For Jung, the deep pain of rejection is merely a symptom of something more essential, the lack of connection with the self. As long as the ego is desperately seeking to be accepted, valued, or validated by external forces, the individual will continue to live in the shadow of themselves. True healing begins when the process of individuation starts, the path of return to psychic wholeness. This process is not just a journey of self-knowledge, but a radical transformation in how the individual relates to the world, to others, and most importantly, to themselves. Individuation, according to Jung, is the continuous movement towards the integration of all parts of being, the conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the ego and the self. It is a process that requires confrontation, rupture, pain, and rebirth. And there is no more potent catalyst to initiate this journey than rejection. This is because when we are rejected and the structure of the ego collapses, we have a rare opportunity, the chance to build something new in place of what was never truly solid. On this new path, the individual stops seeking value from outside and begins to cultivate what Jung called internal authority. This means developing one's own emotional compass. It means being able to look at oneself and affirm, even if no one chooses me, I do not abandon myself. This authority does not arise from motivational slogans or positive affirmations. It is born from traversing pain, from confronting the shadow, from the decision to live according to what is true, even if it costs the acceptance of others. And this is one of the greatest freedoms a human being can achieve, because by stopping the plea for approval, the individual becomes psychologically impervious to rejection. They do not stop feeling. They do not become cold, indifferent, or arrogant. But now, the pain does not destroy them. It does not define them. It does not hijack their identity, because there is something within them that remains steadfast, even when everything outside crumbles. Curiously, it is in this state of internal solidity that life changes. When you stop negotiating your worth, people feel it. Your presence changes. You emanate something rare, something that cannot be bought, taught, or faked, integrity. And this attracts more authentic, deeper, more aligned connections. Ironically, when you become impervious to rejection, you begin to experience fewer situations of rejection, because you no longer vibrate at the frequency of lack, the need to please, or compulsive adaptation. But there is something even deeper on this path. Individuation is not just about freeing oneself from rejection. It is about discovering who you truly are, beyond all roles, traumas, and conditioning. It is a spiritual journey as much as a psychological one, and like any transformative journey, it culminates in an inevitable encounter, the reunion with your shadow, no longer as an enemy, but as an ally. In the next chapter, we will explore the pinnacle of this transformation, how true emotional freedom only occurs when you integrate your shadow, and how this often feared act becomes the foundation of your inner power. Because rejecting the shadow is to remain fragmented, but integrating it is finally becoming whole. Throughout his work, Jung made it clear that the process of individuation is not complete until the shadow is integrated. The shadow is the final guardian between who you are and who you could be. There is no true emotional freedom without this confrontation. Because as long as you continue to fear, deny, or project the repressed aspects of yourself, you will remain vulnerable to rejection, manipulation, and internal collapse. Integrating the shadow is the most radical act of self-compassion, and also the deepest gesture of psychic maturity that one can undertake. But what does it mean in practice to integrate the shadow? It means facing everything you have learned to hide. The anger you repress to be accepted, the ambition you stifled to avoid appearing selfish, the desires you deemed immoral, the thoughts that caused you shame, the emotions you did not allow yourself to feel. To integrate is to recognize that all of this is part of you, and that far from being something to be eliminated, it is a powerful source of vital energy. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be heard. It wants to participate. When you consciously acknowledge it, it loses its destructive power and transforms into creative potential. Repressed anger becomes assertiveness. Denied sadness turns into sensitivity. Envy becomes a sign of unrecognized desires. Projected arrogance onto others reveals the potential for self-confidence that you abandoned. Everything you have judged most harshly in others is almost always a part of yourself asking to return. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but rather by making the darkness conscious. And that is exactly it. The freedom you seek is not in becoming perfect, but in becoming whole. When you integrate the shadow, external rejection loses the power to confirm your negative self-image. You already know your flaws, your wounds, your contradictions, and yet you choose to remain with yourself. You become unshakable, not because you do not feel, but because nothing you feel is a reason to hate yourself. This is the final point of the journey, and also the beginning of a new psychic life. A life where you do not beg for love, but offer presence. Where you do not automatically react to abandonment, but observe, understand, and choose how to act. A life where you no longer seek to fit into a mold, because you have become your own axis. Rejection is not the end, it is the call. A brutal invitation, yes, but absolutely necessary for you to stop fleeing from yourself and finally embrace the wholeness of your existence. Others may leave you, the world may ignore you, but if you are whole, none of that can break you. Now tell me, which part of your shadow have you been avoiding to face? Comment below, share this video with those who need to hear this message. And of course, if this touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. There is still much to be revealed, and before you go, watch the next video. It is essential to continue this journey because awakening is not an event, it is a process, and you have just taken another step.